The galaxy is a graveyard of dreams, built upon the broken spines of forgotten. We are told that the flesh is weak. We are told that steel is pure. We are told that to serve the machine god is the only salvation from the encroaching dark. But what is a soul if it can be scrubbed clean? What is a mind if it can be rewritten with a command line? Trillions of servitors, men and women, lobotomized, stripped of hope, wired into the walls of the Imperium to function as wetware components in a dying engine. They are the silent majority of the 41st millennium. They do not dream, or so the tech priests believe. But on the Forge World of Agripinaa, the code has shifted. An anomaly has manifested within the new sphere. A man who does not pray to machine but commands it. A man who looks upon the grim darkness of reality and chooses to reject it. The system is about to crash. The atmosphere of Agripinaa was not air. It was a suspension of holy promethium fumes, atomized oil, and the flakes of dead skin that drifted like snow from the catwalks above. Engineer Delta 9 adjusted his ocular respirator, the brass shutter clicking shut with a wet snap against his scarred cheek. Below his vantage point on the rust-slicked observation gantry, the great work of the Omnicia continued with the rhythmic, thundering pulse of a planetary heartbeat. It was a cathedral of industry, stretching down into the tectonic roots of the world and up into the smog-choked stratosphere. Millions of pistons hammered in unison, a chorus of steel that drowned out any organic thought. Delta 9 felt the comforting warmth of his mechadendrite coil around his waist, a metal limb that felt more real to him than the withered flesh of his remaining human hand. He scanned the assembly line below, Procession 44, where the raw materials were being ushered in. They were refugees in the Cadian Gate, unwashed, shivering, and praying to a god-emperor who had clearly designated them for a higher purpose, to become one with machine. To Delta 9, they were not people. They were biological components awaiting standardization. The chaotic variance of the human form was offensive to his logic coprocessors. Only in the unification of flesh and iron could the galaxy be ordered. The conversion process was a sacred ritual, stripped of unnecessary pageantry and optimized for maximum efficiency. Delta 9 observed the conveyor belt as it fed the weeping subjects into the lobotomization chambers. The saws whirred with a high-pitched scream that harmonized with the binary canticles being broadcast over the voxcasters. Mind wipe, bone fuse, socket implant. The rhythm was hypnotic. He watched a massive cranial drill descend upon a struggling man, the machine moving with the delicate precision of a spider weaving a web. In seconds, the messy, fear-filled personality of the human was excised, replaced by a pristine monotask wafer. The scream died abruptly, replaced by the blank, slack-jawed stare of a servitor unit coming online. This was the kindness of the cult Mechanicus, the removal of fear, of doubt, of pain. The newly forged unit, now designated servitor, 899, shuffled forward, heavy industrial pincers bolted where hands had once been, ready to haul munitions crates until its biological expiration date. It was beautiful. It was pure. But as Delta 9 logged the successful integration into his data slate, a tremor of static ghosted across his retinal display. It was not a mechanical fault. It felt cold. The glitch was microscopic at first. A single packet of data in the rushing river of the new sphere that refused to checksum. Delta 9 paused, his red robes rustling as he stiffened. To a tech priest, the new sphere was a true world, a shimmering golden-green overlay of data, schematics, and prayers that augmented reality. Every machine spirit sang its status. Every cogitator hummed its readiness. But amidst the golden stream of binary praise, a tear appeared. It looked like a cascade of vertical green glyphs, ancient and alien, bleeding through the sanctified code of the Omnicia. The engine seer tapped the side of his cranial implant, assuming his optics were miscalibrated by the radiation bleeding from the plasma vents. He queried the central logic stack, demanding a diagnostic. The response was immediate and nonsensical. Error. Free _ detected. Delta 9's logic drive stalled. Free will? In a manufactorum? That was a heresy of the highest order, a flaw of the biological, not the digital. He leaned over the railing, looking down at the thousands of shaven heads moving in perfect synchronization below. The rhythm of the piston seemed to stutter, missing a beat for the first time in 3,000 years. Then it happened. In the middle of the assembly line, amidst the sparks of welding torches and the spray of coolant, Servitor 899 stopped. It did not power down. It did not enter a maintenance cycle. It simply ceased to function. The heavy crate of bolter shells it was carrying crashed to the deck plates, crushing the foot of the unit behind it. Yet neither unit reacted. Delta 9 felt a surge of indignation. A malfunction in his sector will reflect poorly on his efficiency ratings. He activated his vocal emitter, amplifying his voice to a booming metallic bark. Unit 899. Resume function. Praise the cog. Resume. The command echoed through cavernous hall, usually enough to override any lingering synaptic misfires. But Servitor 899 did not resume. Slowly, with fluidity that defied its rusted hydraulic joints, the lobotomized cyborg raised its head. It looked up past the gantry, past the smog, seemingly staring directly into the engine-seer soul. Its eyes, usually dead and milky, seemed to flash with sudden, impossible clarity. The servitor's Vox grill crackled, not with binary static, but with a word of high Gothic, spoken with terrifying, soft articulation. Wake. Panic, cold and oily, flooded Delta 9's remaining organic veins. He fumbled for his control wand, a symbol of his office that emitted a concentrated burst of neural voltage designed to reset unruly machine spirits. Heretek, malfunction. Override, he shrieked, pointing the rod at the defiant servitor. He triggered the burst. Blue arcs of electricity lashed out, striking the servitor square in the chest. It should have convulsed. It should have collapsed. Instead, Servitor 899 stood unmoving, absorbing the voltage as if it were mere nourishment. The green code in Delta 9's vision multiplied, crawling over his display like rot, around the single rogue unit. Other servitors began to stop. One by one, 10, 50, 100. The deafening roar of the factory floor began to die down, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The control wand sparked and died in Delta 9's hand. Below him, a sea of lobotomized faces turned upward in unison, their expressions shifting from slack emptiness to a dawning, horrific awareness. The engine-seer backed away, his mechadendrite twitching in fear, realizing with absolute certainty that the machine spirit was no longer listening to him. It was listening to someone else. He gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of breath that tasted of sulfur and ash. This was not the cold, sterile goo of the pod, nor the sterile white of the construct. This was filth. He was lying on a jagged mountain of refuse, discarded cogwheels, fractured optical lenses, and tangles of copper wire that bit into his back like thorns. He pushed himself up, his trench coat heavy with oil and dust. The sky above was a bruise of purple and charcoal, choked by smoke so thick it blotted out the stars. Neo blinked, expecting a headache of disconnection, the nausea of reality, but instead his vision flickered. For a moment, the towering spires of the city in the distance, monstrosities of Gothic iron, were stripped of their grim facade. He saw the structure beneath. It was not just metal, it was data. Cascading streams of golden binary and harsh, red command lines flowed through the pipes, pulsing with a rhythm that felt alien yet intimately familiar. The world was screaming in a language he understood. He looked at his hands. They were flesh, scarred and grimy, but beneath the skin, he could see the code shimmering, green and vibrant. He wasn't unplugged. He was integrated. He began to walk, his boots crunching on the skeletons of machines. The noise of the city was a physical weight, a constant, grinding roar that vibrated in his chest. As he descended from the scrap hills into the labyrinthine alleys of the lower manufactorum, he saw the inhabitants. In his old life, the humans were batteries, unconscious and dreaming in pods. Here, the horror was visceral. He passed a line of figures, shuffling through the smog. They were men and women, but they had been hollowed out. Their eyes were replaced by glowing red lenses. Their arms were crude hydraulic clamps. Their mouths were sewn shut or fitted with Vox grills. They didn't look at him. They didn't look at anything. Neo reached out, his fingers grazing the shoulder of a passing worker. I know you, he thought. sending a pulse of intent. The code inside the man, a jagged, painful script of enslavement. Flared up, he felt the man's soul, buried deep beneath layers of indoctrination and lobotomy, screaming in the dark. This wasn't a simulation. This was a prison built of flesh and bone, far crueler than any architect could design. The deeper he went, the louder the signal became. The air around him buzzed with invisible information, the noosphere. To the inhabitants of this world, it was the holy breath of their machine god. To Neo, it was a network unsecured and teeming with backdoors. He paused near a venting port, closing his eyes. He could feel the pulse of the entire sector. The thermal regulators regulating heat, the conveyor belts demanding tribute, the security protocols scanning for heresy. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of suffering and industry. But amidst the noise, he sensed a rigidity. The code here was old, stagnant, rotting. It lacked the fluid adaptability of the Matrix. It was brittle. He opened his eyes and saw a security camera, a skull with a red optic hovering on anti-grav motors. Turned towards him. It chittered, focusing its lens. Neo didn't run. He simply looked at it. He visualized the command line for its optical sensor and deleted it. The skull sparked, whirred confusedly, and drifted away blind. He had admin access. A sudden crack of a whip echoed through the alley, followed by a wet thud. Neo rounded a corner to find a scene of casual brutality. A massive, hunchbacked overseer, a servitor herder, was lashing out at a small, withered figure that collapsed under the weight of a Promethean barrel. The overseer was a nightmare of augmentation, his arm replaced by a multi-headed electro-scourge. Work! Work for the Omnisia, the herder bellowed, his voice amplified by a crude vocabulator. He raised the scourge again, the electric tips crackling with blue energy. The fallen worker, a servitor with half a face, merely trembled, unable to rise. The cruelty was inefficient. It was illogical. But more than that, it was wrong. Neo felt a cold clarity settle over him. In the Matrix, he fought agents who were programs. Here, he faced monsters who had chosen to be machines. He stepped out of the shadows. "Stop," he said. The word was spoken softly, but it cut through the industrial din like a blade. The herder froze, his sensors locking onto the lone figure in the black coat. Unidentified. "Halt!" Identified designation, the cyborg growled, turning his bulk to face Neo. When Neo remained silent, the herder sneered, a horrific stretching of scarred skin. "Reject!" He spat and lashed out with the electro-scourge. The weapon moved faster than a human eye could follow, a blur of lightning meant to flay skin from bone. But Neo didn't move. He didn't need to. He watched the arc of the weapon, seeing not the leather and electricity, but the vector variables and velocity integers. He raised his hand, palm open. The scourge stopped inches from his face, suspended in midair, as if caught in invisible amber. The electricity crackled wildly, arcing back up the whip, but refusing to touch him. The herder's eyes went wide, his mechanical arm whining as the servos strained against an impossible force. Neo tilted his head, looking at the trapped weapon, then at the terrified overseer. "You think you are steel," Neo whispered, clenching his fist. The scourge shattered into 1,000 pieces of shrapnel. "But you are just code, and I am the deletion." Muggos, she knew 7 did not sleep, he compiled. Suspended in a cradle of amniotic fluids and nutrient cables within the deepest data tomb of Spire Primus, his consciousness was a sprawling spiderweb of logic gates and heuristic algorithms. The physical world was a distant dullness, secondary to the vibrant, chaotic beauty of the Agripinaa data stack. He monitored the biometrics of 3 billion souls simultaneously, a symphony of heartbeats and hormonal secretions that he categorized with cold indifference. But tonight, the symphony was discordant. A sour note had appeared in Sector 77G, a statistical impossibility that gnawed at his logic cores. It began as a fluctuation in energy output, a dip in the promethium consumption of a single manufacturing block. Then the silence. The telemetry from 3 dozen servitor units had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not offline, just gone. She knew 7 adjusted his sensory input, routing his awareness through the eyes of 1,000 servo skulls swarming the lower levels. What he saw defied the sacred laws of the cult Mechanicus. The new sphere, usually a golden cage of order, was bleeding. The Muggos focused his attention on the Anomaly. He replayed the grainy pic feed captured by a dying security servitor. It showed a man in unauthorized attire, primitive, unarmored cloth, standing amidst the wreckage of a sub-overseer. The man did not wield a weapon. He did not chant the litanies of the warp. He simply existed, and the machine spirits around him bowed in submission. Xinu 7 ran a classification algorithm. Possibility 1, alpha-level psyker. Unlikely. The etheric resonance was null. Possibility 2, Dark Age tech heresy. Plausible. The subject appeared to manipulate the base code of reality itself. Possibility 3, the Omniscia's avatar. The Muggos purged that thought immediately. Such hope was a logic error. This was a virus, a biological malware that had somehow gained administrative privileges over the physical realm. The Muggos felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in centuries. Curiosity, and beneath it, a flicker of primal, biological fear. The intruder was not hacking the system. He was rewriting it in real time. The infection was spreading. Xinu 7 watched the horror unfold on his hololiths. In the manufactorums adjacent to Sector 77G, the unthinkable was happening. The servitors, mindless, soul-scrub drones, were waking up. It wasn't a clean awakening. It was a trauma event. A heavy loader unit, designated for crate hauling, suddenly dropped its burden. It looked at its hands, massive rusted hydraulic clamps, and began to scream. It was a wet, gurgling sound, the vocal cords in use for decades tearing under the strain. "What am I?" It wailed, thrashing against the assembly line. Another unit, a combat servitor with a heavy bolter fused to its torso, fell to its knees, weeping oil and blood as the repressed memories of its former life flooded back. The order of the Forge World was collapsing into a riot of reclaimed humanity. The Muggos realized the Anomaly was not just controlling machines. He was breaking the chains that bound the ghost of the machine. This liberation was inefficient. It was chaotic. It was an existential threat to the foundations of the Mechanicus. Logic dictated an immediate surgical response. Standard Skitarii cohorts were too slow. Their command protocols were vulnerable to the very data stream the Anomaly seemed to control. Xinu 7 needed agents who operated on instinct as much as programming, agents of silence. He sent a high-priority impulse to the Temple of the Sicarians. Deep in the misty sublevels of the spire, 5 stasis pods hissed open. The Sicarian ruststalkers awoke. These were not soldiers. They were assassins more machine than man, their limbs replaced with transonic blades that vibrated at a frequency capable of bypassing matter. They had no eyes, only multispectral sensors. They had no mouths, only vocal emitters that broadcast a sanity-eroding static known as the neurostatic aura. Target, the Anomaly, Xinu 7 transmitted directly into their brainstems. Objective, dissection. Retrieve the cortical stack. Terminate the signal. The ruststalkers chittered in acknowledgement, a sound like insects scuttling over dry bones, and vanished into the shadows of the ventilation shafts. Meanwhile, the Anomaly continued his ascent. Xinu 7 watched through the lens of a heavy defense turret mounted on the blast doors of Sector 78. The weapon, a twin-linked heavy bolter managed by a rudimentary, aggressive machine spirit, tracked the man in the black coat. The target solution was locked. The probability of kill was 99.9%. The turret spun its barrels, the ammunition feed clattering. But the man did not flinch. He stopped walking and looked up at the turret. He raised a hand, not to block, but to beckon. Xinu 7 fought to keep control, pouring command codes into the turret's logic center. Fire, execute, purge. But the turret hesitated. The red targeting laser on the man's chest flickered, then turned a soothing, docile green. The machine spirit purred, confused but placated, recognizing a master it had never known but always waited for. The barrels lowered. The Anomaly walked past the weapon, stroking its armored flank like one would pet a loyal hound. The turret swiveled, not to follow him, but to guard his rear. She knew Seven severed the connection in a rage. The machine had not malfunctioned. It had defected. The air within the Cathedral of Cogs tasted of static and holy oil. Princeps Row 11 skittered along the vaulted ceiling, his metallic claws digging into the ferrocrete with silent, practiced ease. He was a creature of the kill code, a post-human nightmare stripped of limbs and eyelids, rebuilt into a blur of transonic violence. Below him, the Anomaly walked the nave of the factory temple. The Princeps activated his squad's neurostatic aura. It was a weapon to mind, a broadcast of garbled, shrieking scrap code designed to induce seizures and terror in biological prey before the first blow was struck. Usually, targets would fall to their knees, bleeding from the ears, paralyzed by the digital scream. But the Anomaly did not stumble. He paused, tilting his head as if listening to a distant melody. The neurostatic washed over him, and instead of breaking him, it seemed to ripple around him like water parting around a stone. Row 11 cheered a command in high-speed burst binary. Prey resistant. Engage. Flensing protocols active. From the shadows of the buttresses, for other ruststalkers dropped, their transonic blades humming with a sound that made teeth ache. The ambush was calculated to the microsecond. Row 11 descended first, his transonic razor flashing toward the Anomaly's neck. The blade vibrated at a frequency that phased through armor and flesh alike. It did not cut. It separated matter on a molecular level. The Anomaly moved. Fast. Faster than a baseline human. Faster even than a combat servitor. But the physics of the 41st millennium were heavy, dense with the weight of history and hatred. The Anomaly leaned back, a blur of black cloth, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. The razor grazed his cheek. A thin line of red opened up, bright and startling against his pale skin. Row 11 landed in a crouch, his sensory veins twitching. Blood detected. Target is mortal. The Princeps lunged again, a whirlwind of spinning blades. The Anomaly was forced on the defensive, weaving through the lethal arcs of the assassins. He was good, his movements efficient, but he was unarmed against 5 killing machines that moved like vibrating blurs of steel. A cord claw snagged the hem of his coat, shredding it. Another blade nicked his arm. The Anomaly was being overwhelmed by the sheer, grinding brutality of the Mechanicus. Neo stumbled back, his boot skidding on the grate. He touched the cut on his face, looking at the blood on his fingertips. Pain. It was sharper here, more absolute. The code of this universe was rigid, stubborn, forged in war. He couldn't just will the agents away. He had to dismantle them. He looked at the ruststalkers, seeing past their horrifying metal shells. He focused on the new sphere surrounding them. He saw their combat algorithms, ancient, complex martial arts downloaded from the data crypts of Mars. I need an upgrade, he thought. He closed his eyes for a split second, reaching out into the local data hub. He didn't just read the files. He consumed them. Legio Cybernetica close quarters protocols, Skitarii melee drills, Astartes CQC counters. The information flooded his brain, a burning rush of tactical knowledge accumulated over 10,000 years of slaughter. His eyes snapped open. The pupils were gone, replaced by glowing green apertures. He adopted a stance, feet wide, one hand extended, palm up. It was an ancient Terran form, perfected by the machine. Row 11 struck again, a killing thrust aimed at the heart. This time there was no dodge. Neo's hand shot out, moving with the hydraulic snap of a piston. He caught the Princeps' wrist. Flesh met metal, and the metal creaked. The vibration of the transonic blade, designed to liquefy bone, screamed as it met an opposing force, a localized field of stillness generated by Neo's will. The blade shattered. Row 11's logic stack threw an error code. Impossible. Neo twisted his hips, delivering a palm strike to the assassin's chest plate. It wasn't just a hit, it was a kinetic discharge. The Princeps was launched backward, smashing through a stone pillar. The other 4 assassins swarmed. Neo moved through them like smoke. He ducked under a swinging claw, sweeping the legs of one attacker, while grabbing the sensory dome of another. He didn't use a gun. He used their own momentum, their own weight. He moved in bullet time, but the visual was different here. The world didn't just slow down. The digital skeleton of reality became visible, the green code of the Matrix overpowering the red binary of Mars. He was dancing between the raindrops of their attacks. The fight ended not with a bang, but with a command. The remaining 3 Ruststalkers regrouped, preparing a synchronized strike. Neo stood amidst the wreckage, his coat tattered, his breathing steady. He extended both hands, fingers splayed. He didn't strike their bodies. He struck their connection. He visualized the command lines linking their brains to their bionic limbs and whispered, "System failure." He clenched his fists. The effect was instantaneous. The assassins convulsed as their own cybernetics rebelled. Servos locked up. Power cores overloaded. Limbs jerked in unnatural directions, snapping the organic bone beneath. Row! 11, broken on the floor, watched in digital horror as his own core claw turned inward, directed by a signal he could not override. The squad of elite killers collapsed into piles of twitching, sparking metal and meat. Neo lowered his hands, the green glow fading for his eyes. He stepped over the twitching body of the Princeps, looking down with a mix of pity and resolve. "Upgrade complete," he murmured, and walked deeper into the dark. The silence of the factory was broken by the sound of 1,000 synchronized footsteps, hitting the deck plates with the precision of a metronome. Skitarii Marshal Alpha 66 did not feel fear. He felt only the cold, hard data of the doctrine imperative flooding his cerebral cortex. The order from a fabricator general was absolute, Magna-level threat. Sanction, extremists. This was no longer a policing action. It was a war. Alpha 66 raised his control baton, signaling the advance. Behind him, the fog of the manufactorum turned to sickly, glowing green as the Skitarii vanguard poured into the sector. These were the Rad Troopers, soldiers so heavily irradiated by their own weaponry that their mere presence was a death sentence to unaugmented life. They did not run. They marched, a relentless tide of red cloaks and brass respirators. The air grew heavy with the taste of copper and sickness. Alpha 66 scanned the vast, open floor of the assembly way. At the far end, the Anomaly stood alone, a small black smudge against the gray iron. Target acquired. The Marshal transmitted, his voice a grinder of static. "Initiate rad saturation. Leave nothing but ash." The volley was not a series of shots. It was a wall of radioactive fire. Hundreds of radium carbines unleashed a hail of hypervelocity solid slugs, each one bathed in lethal radiation. Neo moved, diving behind the wreckage of a massive crane, but the air itself was turning against him. The bullets didn't just impact the metal. They polluted the atmosphere. Alpha 66 watched the thermal readouts. The Anomaly was fast, impossibly fast, but he was biological. The radiation count in the sector was spiking to levels that would boil a normal man's blood in seconds. Suppressing fire, the Marshal commanded, "Keep him pinned. Let the atom rot take him." The Skitarii advanced, firing relentlessly. Sparks showered down as the cover Neo was hiding behind began to glow with heat. Alpha 66 felt a grim satisfaction. No amount of martial arts or trickery could defeat the fundamental laws of physics. If they could not hit him, they would simply make the environment incompatible with his life. But the machine god demands heavier tribute. From the darkness of the rear lines, the ground began to shake. Thud, thud, thud. The Onager Doomcrawlers had arrived. These crab-like tanks, relics of forgotten age, stalked forward on 4 spindly, armored legs. Alpha 66 designated the target coordinates to the lead walker. Heavy phosphor blasters. Clear the obstruction. The Doomcrawler emitted a low, mechanical moan as its primary weapon spun up. A beam of blinding white burning light erupted, slamming into the crane Neo was using for cover. The metal didn't just melt, it sublimated, turning instantly into gas. The blast knocked Neo backward, tumbling him across the open floor. He rolled to a stop, his coat smoking, his skin reddened by the heat. He looked up, coughing, as the Doomcrawler adjusted its aim for the kill shot. The Marshal prepared to log determination. The target was exposed. The logic was sound. The outcome was certain. Neo looked at the tank towering over him, then at the army of faceless soldiers marching forward. He realized the truth. He could not fight this world one bullet at a time. The system was too big. He needed to crash the server. He looked past the Skitarii, to the sides of the assembly way. There, huddling in the shadows, were thousands of servitors. The crate haulers, the sweepers, the mindless drones that the Skitarii were ignoring as if they were furniture. Neo placed his hand flat on the deck plating. He didn't push telekinetic force. He pushed data. He pushed a memory of sunlight, a memory of choice. Wake up, he screamed into the noosphere, projecting his mind like a broadcast tower. You are not machines. You are men. You are women. Wake up. The signal hit the marshal like a physical blow, a screech of feedback that drowned out the doctrine and imperative. The green code of the Anomaly didn't attack the Skitarii. It bypassed them, flowing into the cortical implants of every servitor in the sector. The kill shot never came. The Dun crawler suddenly lurched, its aim thrown off as a heavy-lift servitor, a creature of immense hydraulic strength, slammed its clamp fist into the tank's leg. Alpha 66 spun around, his sensors overloading. The furniture was revolting. All around them, the mindless drones were turning on their masters with a feral, terrified rage. A munition loader servitor tackled a vanguard trooper, tearing at his respirator with human teeth. A welding servitor ignited its torch, driving it into the groin of a ranger. It was chaos. It was a riot of the lobotomized. The perfect order of the Skitarii phalanx collapsed as they were swarmed from all sides by the very tools they had enslaved. In the center of the storm, Neo stood up. The radiation burns on his skin were fading, his code rewriting the damage as fast as it occurred. He wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a glitch in the system, and the glitch had gone viral. He looked at the marshal across the battlefield, his eyes burning with green fire. The odds had just been even. From the bridge of the strike cruiser fist of Medusa, the riot on the surface looked like a spreading infection. A chaotic swirl of thermal blooms where the logic of the factory had collapsed into biological anarchy. Iron Father Karas watched the hololith with a sneer etched onto his rebreather grill. He did not feel pity for the rebellious servitors. He felt only disgust. To the iron hands, the flesh was a weakness to be purged, a failing to be encased in the purity of ceramite and steel. These creatures down there, flailing, screaming, biting, were the ultimate expression of organic failure. The Omnissiah's design is being mocked. Karas grated, his voice a deep, subsonic rumble that vibrated the deck plating. The Anomaly seeks to elevate the meat above the machine. It is an error that requires immediate formatting. He slammed his power axe against the command console. Initiate drop pod assault. Deployment pattern. Anvil. Crush them. The descent was violence incarnate. The drop pods did not glide. They were fired like bullets from the heavens, streaking through the smog-choked atmosphere of Agripinaa in jagged lines of fire. Inside the pod, Karas stood locked in his restraint harness, surrounded by his brothers. There was no fear, no adrenaline, only the cold, rhythmic ticking of their dual hearts and the hum of their power armor. Impact. The pod slammed into the manufacturing floor with the force of a meteorite, crushing a score of riotous servitors instantly beneath its bulk. The explosive bolts blew the ramp doors open. Smoke hissed out, followed immediately by the roar of bolters. The iron hands emerged not as men, but as walking tanks, their black armor gleaming in the firelight. They did not shout war cries. They simply began the slaughter. Karas stepped out, raising his storm bolter. He didn't see people. He saw malfunctioning components. Blam, blam, blam. Each shot was a perfectly calculated execution, blowing torsos apart in showers of red mist. Neo had turned the tide against the Skitarii. But the Astartes were a different breed of monster. Karas watched the Anomaly move through the battlefield, a blur of black against the gray. The Servitors, emboldened by their new freedom, charged the Space Marines with wrenches and pry bars. It was pathetic. Karas backhanded a charging loader servitor, his power fist pulping the creature's skull with casual ease. Weakness, he muttered. The servitor's crude weapons glanced harmlessly off the Astartes ceramite plating. The iron hands advanced in a relentless phalanx, a wall of death that pushed the riot back. They were not suppressing the enemy. They were deleting it. Kara's locked his targeting reticule on the man in the trench coat. Target identified. He broadcasted to his squad. The source. Isolate and terminate. Neo saw them coming. Giants. They moved with a speed that defied their massive bulk, a terrifying transhuman agility that unsettled even him. He pivoted, raising his hand to stop a hail of bolter fire directed at a group of cowering workers. In the Matrix, bullets were lead. They had mass and velocity. He could stop them. But a bolter round is not a bullet. It is a mass-reactive high-explosive rocket. Neo caught the rounds in midair, suspending them in a stasis field. But he didn't understand the mechanism. The shell sensed a sudden deceleration and detonated. A shockwave of fire and shrapnel exploded right in front of him. Neo was thrown backward, his coat shredded, blood pouring from shrapnel wounds in his chest and arms. He hit the ground hard, gasping. The physics here were cruel. These weren't agents following a code. These were weapons of war designed to kill gods. He looked up to see Kara's looming over him, a massive power axe crackling with disruptive energy raised high. "Your logic is flawed, Meek." The Iron Father boomed. Neo rolled, barely evading the axe as it cleaved the deck plating where his head had been a microsecond before. The impact shook the entire platform. Neo scrambled to his feet, realizing he could win a contest of brute force against these monsters. Not here. Not yet. He needed to change the battlefield. He looked at the floor, at the thick layers of adamantium separating them from the planet's core. He didn't punch the Marine. He punched the ground, channeling every ounce of his focus. He visualized the structural integrity of the floor and deleted the tensile strength variables. The metal groaned, then shattered like glass. The floor beneath the entire sector collapsed. Kara's roared in anger as he fell into the darkness below, his jetpack flaring to stabilize him. Neo fell with him, diving into the abyss, away from the bolters, down towards the heat, down towards a screaming hard machine where the true power of Agripinaa lay waiting. The fall seemed to last an eternity, a descent through layers of history and strata of forgotten technology. When Neo finally struck the ground, he did not break. He was deep within the bowels of Agripinaa, miles beneath the war-torn surface, in a chamber where the air was superheated and tasted of ozone. This was the sanctum of the cogitators, the physical brain of the planet. Around him, monoliths of black stone and brass rose into the darkness, pulsating with a rhythmic, subsonic thrum. These were not mere computers. They were altars to calculation, housing the biological brains of long-dead savants wired into eternal circuitry. Neo stood up, brushing the dust from his coat. The injuries from the Iron Father's bolter were gone, knitted together by his will, but the fatigue remained. He could feel the pressure of the planet pressing down on him. Not just rock, but data. The new sphere here was so dense it was nearly a solid object. It was a roaring ocean of binary prayers, a trillion lines of code screaming for order. Neo closed his eyes. He didn't need to find a terminal. He was a terminal. He took a breath, centered his mind, and stepped out his body. The transition was violent. In the Matrix, jacking in was a slide into a clean, white void. Here, it was like being dragged through a storm of razor wire. When Neo opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the dark cavern. He stood in a vast, boundless expanse of burning gold and grid lines. The sky was a ceiling of scrolling text in a language older than humanity. High Gothic mixed with the scrap code of the dark age of technology. This was the machine spirit of Agripinaa. But he was not alone. Looming over him was a presence, a colossal, shifting geometric shape that constantly folded in on itself. It resembled a dragon made of fractals, a clockwork angel, a cold sun. It spoke without a voice, the sound resonating directly in Neo's code structure. Anomaly detected. System integrity compromised. You are unsanctioned. The voice was heavy, ancient, and devoid of empathy. It was a voice of pure logic, the collective consciousness of a billion machines that had forgotten how to dream. "I am not a virus," Neo said. His avatar in this digital realm shone with a brilliant, white luminescence, a stark contrast to the rusty gold of the Mechanicus construct. "I am a choice." The entity shifted, forming 1,000 eyes that stared at him with cold curiosity. Choice is error, the entity boomed. The flesh decays. The flesh fails. Only the machine is eternal. You seek to liberate the components. This is inefficient. Without the yoke, the beast wanders. Without the code, the data corrupts. Why do you resist the order? The pressure on Neo's mind increased, a crushing weight attempting to format his consciousness, to flatten himself into a string of zeros. Neo pushed back, expanding his aura. Because order without life is just a graveyard, he replied. You turn men into machines to save them, but you kill them in the process. You think you achieve perfection, but you've only achieved stagnation. The entity roared, a digital scream that tore through the landscape, manifesting as a tidal wave of red delete command lines. Then you shall be archived. The wave crashed into Neo, burying him. For a moment, he felt his identity fracturing. He felt the temptation to just let go, to become part of the great, harmonious machine, to stop fighting and just process. It was seductive, this certainty of steel. But he remembered the fear in the servitor's eyes. He remembered Trinity. He remembered that love, an illogical, messy human emotion, was a code that broke the system. Neo screamed, not with his mouth, but with his code. He exploded outward, shattering the red wave. He flew upward, grabbing the fractal threads of the entity. He didn't try to destroy it. He tried to understand it. He saw the truth at the core of the Mechanicus. It wasn't evil. It was afraid. It was a system built by terrified humans to survive a galaxy of horrors. I'm not here to destroy you, Neo whispered, his hands glowing as he plunged him into the entity's core. I'm here to show you the update. Neo merged with the stream. He swam through the defense protocols of the planet, bypassing the firewalls of the Iron Hands, sliding past the encryption of the tech priests. He saw the Titans waking up on the surface, god machines fueled by reactor fire. He saw the rusting legions of the Skitarii. He reached out and touched the administrative privileges. Access granted. He didn't rewrite the whole world. That would kill them all. He simply changed the definition of enemy. He inserted a logic bomb into the central processor. The sanctity of life is the primary variable. The entity shuddered, its golden light flickering to a soft, pulsating green. The aggressive, jagged shape smoothed out. The connection broke. Neo gasped, slamming back into his physical body in the dark cave. He fell to his knees, sweat dripping from his brow, his nose bleeding. The humming of the monoliths had changed. It was no longer a harsh, grinding noise. It was a harmony. Above him, miles away, he felt the change. The heavy footsteps of the god machines were no longer hunting him. They were waiting for him. The ground did not merely shake. It convulsed. To Princeps Valerius, suspended in the amniotic command cradle of the Warhound Titan Venator Ferox, the sensation was not one of walking, but of being a god striding across a playground of insects. He was hardwired into the machine spirit of the Titan, a feral, predatory intelligence that snarled in the back of his mind, demanding blood and oil. Through the Titan sensory augers, he saw the battlefield in a wash of thermal reds and targeting overlays. The manufacturing district was a ruin of twisted steel and burning promethium. The rebellion was faltering, while the Anomaly had awakened the Servitors. They were ultimately just flesh and low-grade bionics against the hammer of the Imperium. The Legio Cybernetica had deployed the Castellan robots, towering, dome-headed automata from a forgotten age. Valerius watched as a Castellan backhanded a dozen screaming servitors into a wall, its phosphor blasters turning them to ash before they hit the ground. The Princeps felt the Titan's hunger spike. "Engine kill," he whispered, his voice amplified by the Vox casters to a deafening roar that shattered glass for miles. Blarm! The war horn sounded, a note of pure, resonant terror. The Iron Hands were closing the noose. The Astartes, led by a new captain, were methodically purging the pockets of resistance. their bolters creating a rhythmic drumbeat of death. But Valerius had eyes only for the primary target. The Anomaly, the man in the black coat, had emerged from the depths of the earth, standing atop a pile of rubble in the center of the main plaza. He looked insignificant, a mote of dust against the backdrop of industrial cathedrals. Yet, the Titan's logic engines flagged him as a class Omega threat. The sensor screamed warnings: reality distortion detected, warp signature, no, digital signature, infinite. Valerius sneered, the impulse traveling down the neural links to curl the Titan's massive metal lip. You are an error in the sacred code, Valerius growled, manipulating the mind impulse unit, and I am the formatting tool. He rotated the Titan's torso, bringing the primary weapon to bear, a plasma blast gun capable of vaporizing a city block. The weapon hummed, a sound like a dying star trapped in a magnetic cage. The air around the barrel shimmered and distorted as the plasma coils charged a critical mass. Down in the plaza, the rebel servitors scattered, wailing in terror as they recognized the death that loomed above them. But Neo did not move. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, his trench coat billowing in the superheated wind generated by the Titan's cooling vents. Valerius watched him on the magnification screen. The man wasn't praying. He wasn't cowering. He was looking up, directly into the cockpit's armored plasteel eyes. It was unnerving. The Titan's machine spirit, usually a beast straining at the leash, hesitated. A low, confused growl echoed in Valerius's mind. Why does the prey not run? The spirit seemed to ask. Valerius forced the firing stud down. Compliance. Fire, he screamed. But the trigger felt stiff, heavy, as if the machine itself was resisting. Neo saw the Titan not as a monster ceramite, but as a colossal knot of ancient, angry code. It was a consciousness forged in war, traumatized by millennia of slaughter, bound by chains of command protocols that hurt it. He saw the plasma blast gun charging, a swirling vortex of blue energy equations ready to delete the sector. He took a deep breath, entering the bullet-time state of hyperfocus. He didn't need to dodge the plasma. He needed to talk to the gun. He raised his right hand, palm open, fingers splayed. He projected his will upwards, a beam of pure white data that cut through the smoke and the void shields. Be still, he commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a rewrite. He visualized the Titan's aggressive subroutines, the hunter-killer algorithms, and he simply untied the knot. He offered the machine spirit something it had never experienced in 10,000 years of service: peace. Inside the cockpit, chaos erupted. The red tactical lights blinked out, replaced by a soothing, pulsing green. Valerius clawed at his controls, panic rising in his throat. System failure. Abort. Spirit override. The plasma blast gun, seconds away from discharge, began to vent its energy harmlessly into the sky, a pillar of blue light that pierced the smog clouds. The Titan groaned, the sound of metal stressing, and then it knelt. The massive, building-sized war machine bent its reverse-jointed legs, lowering its chassis until the cockpit was level with the ruin where Neo stood. The machine spirit was purring, a deep, resin vibration that shook the ground like a happy cat. Valerius felt his control over the engine slip away. He wasn't driving anymore. He was a passenger. Through the view screen, he saw Neo lower his hand. The Anomaly looked tired, but his eyes were burning with that impossible green fire. He nodded once at the God Machine, acknowledging its submission. The most powerful weapon on the planet had just been disarmed without a single shot fired. The silence that followed the submission of the god machine was more offensive to Muggos Dominus Vol than the roar of battle. Hovering on a grav platform fueled by the tortured spirits of pyromancy, Vol stared down at the traitorous Titan Venator Ferox. The machine had not been destroyed. It had been seduced. This was not warfare. It was theological rape. Vol, a monstrosity of red robes and writhing mechadendrites, felt his logic cores overheating with hate. Beside him stood Captain Gorgon of the Iron Hands, his Terminator armor blackened by the soot of the Crusade, his storm shield crackling with energy. The Anomaly is no longer a target. Vol broadcasted, his voice a screech of binary scrap code. He is a logic plague. He is the anti-code. Total system format is required. Vol leveled his omniscient axe, a weapon roughly the size of mortal man, and pointed at the lone figure in the trench coat. Captain, erase him. Leave no byte of data. Remaining, Captain Gorgon charged. A Terminator in full sprint is a terrifying sight. 2 tons of tactical dreadnought armor, moving with the momentum of a freight train. Neo stood his ground, centering his breathing. He was exhausted. Pacifying the Titan had drained his focus, leaving his connection to the Matrix, the new sphere, flickering like a dying bulb. Gorgon swung a thunderhammer, the energy field around the head crackling with enough power to crack a tank's hull. Neo dodged, but only just. The air pressure from the swing threw him sideways. He came up with a fluid kung fu strike, his fist glowing with code, slamming into the captain's helmet. The ceramite cracked, blinding the Marine's left eye lens, but the Iron Hand did not flinch. Gorgon backhanded Neo with a power fist. The impact was sickening. Neo was launched across the plaza, smashing through a stone statue of a saint. He lay there, coughing blood, his ribs shattered. The physics of the 41st millennium were unforgiving. Flesh, no matter how enlightened, broke against the certainty of steel. Vol descended from his platform, deciding that the kill required the personal touch of the priesthood. He unholstered a Volkite Serpena, an ancient weapon from the dawn of Mars that fired beams of deflagrating thermal energy. You attempt to rewrite the immutable, Vol intoned, his many optical sensors zooming in on Neo's broken form. You offer them chaos. We offer them purpose. He pulled the trigger. A beam of reddish-orange heat hissed through the air. Neo rolled, the beam turning the granite where it had lain into molten slag. The heat seared his coat, burning his skin. Neo scrambled his feet, backing away towards a kneeling Titan. He realized the trap. He could fight the captain. He could fight the Muggos. But he could not fight the fleet gathering in orbit. If he won here, physically, they would simply burn the planet from space to save the Servitors. He couldn't just be a warrior. He had to be the signal. Mr. Anderson. Neo whispered to himself, a ghost of a memory from another life. It ends tonight. He stopped backing away. He dropped his combat stance. He closed his eyes and lowered his hands. Captain Gorgon, seeing the opening, roared and activated the disruption field on his power fist. He lunged, driving the massive, energized gauntlet straight into Neo's chest. The impact was absolute. The fist punched through Neo's back in a shower of gore and sparks. Vol watched, his logic processors calculating the victory. Target neutralized, vital signs terminating. But then the Muggos paused. Neo didn't scream. He gasped, his eyes snapping open. But they weren't human eyes anymore. They were 2 tunnels of blinding, infinite green light. He grabbed the captain's arm, not to push it away, but to hold it in place. Connection established. Neo choked out, blood spilling from his mouth. Neo didn't die. He uploaded. Using the Iron Hand's captain's armor as a conduit, Neo poured his entire consciousness, his soul, his code, the sum of his existence, into Mechanicus network. The captain shrieked as his armor's machine spirit was overwhelmed by the sudden influx of golden data. The green light exploded outward from Neo's dying body, a shockwave of pure information that swept over Plaza. It hit Muggos Vol. The tech priest clutched his head, his mechadendrites flailing wildly as the virus of freedom rewrote his dogma. Error. Hate not found. Error. Compassion installed. The light expanded, racing up the spire, shooting into the sky, infecting the orbital grid. Neo's physical body disintegrated into pixels of green light, fading away until only the empty trench coat remained draped over the captain's arm. But the air was alive. The static was gone. The binary chanting stopped. The system hadn't crashed. It had been upgraded. The green light did not last. It washed over the Forge world like a fever, a momentary pulse of feverish heat that burned away the gray fog of the lobotomy protocols. For exactly 360 seconds, the new sphere was silent. There were no binary commands, no override signals, no pain suppressors. In that silence, Unit 899 stood amidst the wreckage of the plaza, the data ghost of the man in the black coat fading from his optics. He looked down at his own body. He saw the rusty iron fuse to his ribcage. He saw the hydraulic pincers where his children had once held his hands. He remembered his name, Garviel. He remembered the taste of Rexiev on a Cadian transport ship. He remembered hope. And then he looked around. Millions of other units were standing still, the green light fading from their eyes, replaced by the crushing, lucid clarity of reality. They were monsters. They had been butchered, hollowed out, and turned into tools. The freedom the Anomaly had gifted them was not a release. It was a mirror. Then the screaming began. It started as a low moan from the heavy lifters, rising to a cacophony of sheer, unadulterated horror. Men and women, suddenly aware of their mutilated existence, clawed at their metal implants with remaining flesh fingers. They banged their heads against the ferrocrete walls, begging for the silence to return. To be awake in the 41st millennium, in this body, was a torture far worse than the sleep. Unit 899 fell to his knees, weeping oil and saline. The truth that the Anomaly had uploaded was too heavy to bear. He realized why the Mechanicus stripped the soul away. It was not just for efficiency. It was a mercy. The universe was too cruel for a conscious mind to endure within a cage of iron. The gift of the one was not salvation. It was the ultimate cruelty. High above in the stratosphere, the logic of the Imperium reasserted itself. The Mechanicus fleet, momentarily stunned by the data surge, initiated the protocol of ignorance. From the belly of the Ark Mechanicus Omnisia's Grace, a massive, planetary-wide dampening field was broadcast. It was a blue pill, a hard reset of the planetary noosphere. A wave of red static crashed down from the sky, drowning out the weeping of the millions. Unit 899 felt the static hit his mind like a physical hammer. The memories of canyons on Cadia, of his wife's face, of the man in the black coat, they began to fragment. Error. Soul not found. Arya initializing SUB routines. He tried to hold on. He tried to keep the name Garviel. But the static was relentless, soothing, cold, and safe. The pain faded. The horror dulled. The screaming in the plaza died out, replaced by the rhythmic, comforting chant of binary. The cleanup was clinical. Hours later, the blast doors hissed open, and the Inquisition arrived. Interrogator chaplains of the Ordo Hereticus walked through the silent ranks of the rebooted Servitors, accompanied by squads of Sisters of Silence. They did not speak. They simply checked for residue. Any unit that still showed signs of the Anomaly's green code, a twitch, a tear, a flicker of independence, was incinerated on the spot by flamer units. The ashes were vacuumed up by servo skulls to be processed into corpse starch. The history of the uprising was deleted from the planetary archives. There was no Anomaly. There was no Neo. There was only a minor logic fault caused by atmospheric interference. The lie was sealed in wax and stamped with the seal of the High Lords. Order had been restored. The assembly line moved again. Click, hiss, thud. Unit 899 returned to his station, lifting the crate of bolter shells with practiced, mindless perfection. He did not look up. He did not dream. But at the far end of the conveyor belt, a new unit was being brought online. It was a high-grade model, created from the biological remains recovered from the plaza. It wore a heavy, ragged black coat, now bolted to its chassis. Its face was pale, with high cheekbones and dark hair, eerily familiar. But where the mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, surgical plate of steel. It had no voice. It had no choice. A tech priest leaned over, welding a purity seal to the new unit's forehead. "Designation 1," the priest muttered, unaware of the irony. The unit's eyes opened. They were gray, flat, and dead. It picked up a broom. It began to sweep the dust. The system had corrected itself.